I think, Mr. Zeldin, if your children were drinking water, if your children were drinking water in Santa Ana, Mr. Zeldin, maybe you wouldn't be so cavalier about whether there was lead in their water. Maybe you would give a damn instead of coming in here and suggesting that any grant that takes lead out of the water must be waste, fraud, or abuse because you need the money for a tax cut for rich people because you're totally beholden to the oil industry. You could give a rat's ass about how much cancer your agency causes.
Adam Schiff's exchange with Lee Zeldin wasn't just a heated back and forth in Congress. It was a moment that underscored a much larger battle over what kind of country we want to be.
Mr. Zeldin, you've only been at the EPA for a few months, but in that time, you've done more to dismantle this agency than probably all of your predecessors put together. That may be a source of pride for you, but it's not for the American people. You've unlawfully terminated grants without justification. You fired and pushed out some of the best scientists who inform EPA's decision-making. You refused to spend money that Congress has appropriated to the EPA by law. And you've launched a pro-polluter effort to delete dozens of environmental protections. On top of all this, you've launched an effort to overturn California's Clean Air Act waivers that improve the quality of air breathed by 40 million Californians and by millions more in other states who have adopted California's highest standards. That effort, for which my colleagues have decided to eliminate the filibuster to achieve, is not exactly what anyone would call cooperative federalism. But it's your budget that's the ultimate proof of your priorities. You propose cutting America's environmental agency by 55%, meaning that in your view, and that of President Trump, more than half of the environmental efforts of the EPA, more than half of the efforts to make sure Americans have clean air and clean water are just a waste. They're just a waste. Meaning that Californians and people all over the country, when they breathe the air, thanks to your good work, it'll mean there's more diesel and more other particulate matter in the air. When they drink a glass of water, they may not be able to see it, but this water that Americans drink is going to have more chemicals like PFAS, forever chemicals in their water. This will be your good work. I want to be very specific about the legacy you're going to leave if you're successful in eliminating half of our efforts to clean our water and our air. Your legacy will be more lung cancer. It'll be more bladder cancer. It'll be more head and neck cancer. It'll be more breast cancer. It'll be more leukemia and pancreatic cancer, more liver cancer, more skin cancer, more kidney cancer, more testicular cancer, more colorectal cancer, more rare cancers of innumerable varieties. That will be your legacy. I don't know that that's a legacy that anyone should want to have. My kids are going to be breathing that air just like yours. My family's going to be drinking the water just like yours. We may not be able to pinpoint just who gets cancer because you've done away with half the budget of those looking out for our clean water and clean air. But it's going to be somebody's kids, it's going to be somebody's family. To put this in more specific terms, there are 22 grants frozen by the EPA focused on improving health and reducing pollution, many of which directly impact children. For example, one project in Santa Ana, California, provided funding to help detect and prevent lead poisoning in children. According to the census, about 10% of the population in Santa Ana are under the age of 9. With a population of about 310,000 people, that means that 31,000 children are at risk of lead poisoning in Santa Ana without this funding. What is it about this grant that you and EPA believe is problematic enough to freeze this funding and put potentially 31,000 children at risk?
Senator, who is the grant applicant?
This is to the city of Santa Ana.
You have the biggest, state, so we're going to have to go through every single list of the grant. Well, by the way, with that wind-up, by the way, I understand that you were an aspiring fiction writer. I see why.
Oh, yeah. Well, I understand your view that you can cut half of the agency and it won't affect people's health or their water, their air. That to me is a big fiction, Mr. Zeldin.
You
And
forgot about the fact of cleaning up
I have
after
to
the
think,
LA
Mr. Zeldin,
wildfires.
I think, Mr. Zeldin,
President when I was in San Diego.
if your children were
the
drinking
Tijuana
water,
River sewage crisis,
if your
apparently we're
children
going
were
out on our
drinking
own for
water
that.
in Santa Ana, Mr. Zeldin, maybe you wouldn't be so cavalier about whether there was lead in their water. Maybe you would give a damn instead of coming in here and suggesting that any grant that takes lead out of the water must be waste, fraud, or abuse because you
gentleman's time has
because
expired.
you
Who said
need
that? The whole
the
thing,
money for a
everything
tax
you
cut
said,
for rich people
your time. It's all
because
make-believe.
you're totally beholden to the oil industry.
The gentleman's time.
You could give a rat's ass about how much
is.
cancer
Because
your agency
you're trying to
causes.
destroy.
Schiff's remarks weren't about political point scoring. They were about a fight for public health, environmental responsibility, and the moral duty of government to protect its people. When Schiff accused Zeldin of dismantling the EPA, he wasn't exaggerating. Over the last several years, we've seen a steady effort by conservative leadership to weaken environmental protections in the name of deregulation. The justification is always the same: cut red tape, free up business, spur economic growth. But beneath that rhetoric lies a harsh reality. Fewer safeguards mean more pollution, more toxins in the water, more carcinogens in the air. Schiff's argument is that these cuts don't make America stronger or freer, they make America sicker. When he listed the cancers that could result, lung, bladder, liver, pancreatic, he wasn't being dramatic for its own sake. He was humanizing policy. Because the truth is, when you eliminate funding for clean air and water initiatives, the victims aren't abstract numbers in a spreadsheet. They're children in Santa Ana breathing exhaust from diesel trucks. They're families drinking water contaminated with lead or forever chemicals. They're communities that can't afford lobbyists, that don't have political connections, that depend on these programs as their first and last line of defense. Schiff's central question, what is it about this grant that you believe is problematic enough to freeze it, cuts to the heart of the issue. Why would anyone in government see protecting children from lead poisoning as wasteful? Why would anyone call removing toxins from water an unnecessary expense? Schiff is exposing the false economy behind these budget cuts. Because every dollar not spent preventing contamination ends up costing tenfold later, in healthcare costs, in lost productivity, in human suffering that can't be measured in dollars. And when Zeldin deflected by saying Schiff was a fiction writer, Schiff's comeback, I see why, wasn't just a retort. It was a way of flipping the narrative. Schiff was saying that the real fiction here isn't in his argument, it's in the conservative fantasy that slashing the EPA will somehow not affect the health of Americans. The idea that we can cut half the budget of the nation's environmental agency and still have clean air and water, that's the fiction. Schiff went even deeper, pointing out the hypocrisy that underlies so much of this debate. He said, if your children were drinking that water, maybe you wouldn't be so cavalier. That's not political theater, that's empathy. It's the human reminder that policy has consequences. It's easy to dismiss environmental programs as wasteful spending when your kids aren't the ones facing lead exposure or when your community isn't next to an industrial site. But when those decisions touch your own family, it stops being a political abstraction. It becomes a moral crisis. This exchange reminds us that environmental policy isn't just about nature or science, it's about justice. Communities of color, low-income families, and children are always hit first and hardest when environmental protections are rolled back. When funding is frozen, it's their neighborhoods that get sicker. When enforcement is weakened, it's their kids who end up with asthma or developmental issues. Schiff's passionate defense of the EPA is also a defense of equality, of the idea that every American, regardless of where they live or how much they earn, deserves the right to breathe clean air and drink safe water. So the next time someone talks about cutting waste at the EPA, remember what Schiff was really arguing for. He wasn't just fighting for a policy or a budget line. He was fighting for the principle that government exists to serve and protect its people, not polluters or corporate interests. If we want a country where our children can grow up healthy, where clean water isn't a privilege but a right, then we can't afford to be passive about these issues. We have to stay informed, stay engaged, and hold leaders accountable when they treat public health like a political bargaining chip. Because at the end of the day, the air we breathe and the water we drink connect us all, Democrat, Republican, Independent alike. Schiff's message, stripped of all political labels, was a plea for responsibility, a reminder that leadership means caring enough to act before the damage is done. And that's not fiction. That's the real story of what's at stake.